Hyderabad Postgres days, and today we'll be talking about the Postgres wall. Like we'll just go over how the Postgres wall actually functions from the point of view of the code base. Now, a valid question is that why are we discussing this particular topic? So, wall is not something new, right? It has been in Postgres since version 9, if I'm not wrong. But, and like, it is also not a novelty of Postgres. But at the same time, it is one of the most critical components within Postgres that powers a lot of very useful features. The wall has been implemented across multiple databases like MySQL, Oracle. We even have the implementation of wall within Kafka. So like wall has multiple use cases, but and it is as important as that particular thing. As I said, wall is a very critical feature within Postgres. It not only affects performance in terms of the storage engine, but it also affects how well your queries execute. And sometimes an incorrect wall configuration can be a very bad thing for your database. Like it could completely ruin the performance, even though you are like executing the most optimized queries. In this particular session, we'll first see the requirement of a wall. We'll then dive into the Postgres source code a little bit to understand how basically a wall record looks like and how it is appended into the entire workflow. Then we'll see how does the wall process fit within the actual Postgres backend process, and then we'll like just have a quick overview of some of the features. A little bit about myself. So my name is Akshay Jaimni. I'm a software engineer at a company called DeepSource. So we basically deal with static analysis and those sort of use cases. But so my name is Akshay Jaimni and I'm working as a software engineer at DeepSource. But my association with Postgres has been since 2023. I started out as a Google Summer of Code student, mostly working with the PG Web code base. At that time, we developed a testing harness for the official Postgres website. After that, in 2024, I shifted towards contributing to the observability space. So there is a tool called PG Watch by Cybertech. So I don't know if how many people have used that tool, but it has been specifically designed for gathering metrics for your Postgres clusters. Right, so I spent some time in 2024 in that particular area, and right now I am exploring Postgres internals for fun. And this entire talk is a result of that exploration. So yeah, let's continue. So I actually assumed there would be some students within the room, so I had some basic introduction for Asset, but I don't think any students are here, right? Yeah, I will just skip over this. So again, wall, as we all know, is there to ensure durability, and like to put it very simply, it is sort of the first item that gets written when a query is executed. Not exactly like, but to give a very oversimplified view of the entire process, right? Whenever you execute any query, any manipulation query like an insert, update, or delete, a wall record is generated for that particular query before it actually gets flushed to your disk. Now, let's take it from the perspective of an application developer. That why do we actually need a wall in place, right? So, if I'm an application developer, I just started out using a database. Postgres is my first database, and I'm not aware of how a database actually works. For me, there is literally no difference between a file system and a database. Like it's just that I said, okay, you insert these and these items within the data within this particular file, and just keep it on the disk till I need it, right? But again, this is a very let's say redundant, a very bad approach, because disks are inherently slow. Even though we have SSDs now, but disks are inherently slow, and if you could just constantly bombard your disks with multiple writes and like whatnot, you actually end up like depleting the entire life of that particular hardware, right? So like if we come a step a little closer to the actual implementation, we have the memory in place, right? So intuitively you would assume that okay, database is an application like Word or Excel, right? So if you want to store some data, why don't you just use the operating system? Like just request whatever pages you want from the disk into the memory, right? manipulate them, and then just ask the operating system to directly dump them back into the database. Right? So although that sounds very reasonable and very intuitive at first, but again, at this point, you are offloading all your guarantees of durability to the operating system. So let's say you have 100 of applications running on that particular machine, right? Even if you are hosting a database server, it's not that only your database is running. You have your firewalls and everything else set up, which is also being treated as a resource from by the perspective of the operating system. So if there are any, like say, sudden interrupts, or if an application suddenly requires a large amount of memory, it is possible that your data does not end up being flushed to the disk. So in these cases, what Postgres does is that it pre-allocates a fixed amount of memory with memory before, which we also call as the shared buffers. And within this shared buffers, you can just assume that okay, Postgres just took some amount of memory, and within these shared buffers, Postgres will bring in all the pages that are related for its purposes, right? So whenever you execute a query, the query planner will generate a plan, and when the execution stage comes in, the respective pages would be fetched in to the shared buffers, and there you will actually make all the changes and then flush all of those changes, all of those pages back to the disk. But again, although in this particular case you do have control over when your data is actually flushed to the disk, you cannot handle situations where, let's say, your system just suddenly crashed, or maybe basically you cannot account for all scenarios where which are out of control for a system in itself. So in this case, what Postgres does is that it maintains a log of all the operations that you want to perform on the data that you have stored. So again, as I said earlier, before you execute any query, it is logged, and after logging that query, we actually go ahead and modify the data that the pages that we have brought into memory. Now, with this particular capability is known as write-ahead logging, because again, you're writing this log ahead of actually committing any changes to the data that you have brought into memory. So if we take the life cycle of a query, again a very oversimplified view, you will have your query. It reaches the postmaster process. Once it reaches the postmaster process, if it's the first time your client is connecting to Postgres, it will fork a separate client to actually carry out whatever task you wanted to, and this client will actually trigger the query planner. The query planner will generate a query plan, which will be again be executed. Now, before the execution of this query plan, the existing operations that you have logged in the WAL file are actually dumped to the disk. After which you append this particular operation into the write-ahead log, and it is then where you actually go ahead and manipulate all the heap and index pages that you brought into the shared buffers. Now, Postgres typically stores all the WAL files within a directory called pgwal. This directory is within your pg data directory, whichever you have configured it to be for your Postgres cluster. And if we take a look at a WAL record, so if you just use pgwal inspect, you will actually get all of these values that I'm about to discuss. But if you were to dissect the entire structure of how a WAL record is structured, so at the top level we have xlog record. So this is more of an header. I hope everyone is able to see the definition and the structure properly. But at first you have the total length of the entire record, then you have the transaction associated to it, and then you have a pointer to the previous entry in that particular WAL. Like, these three are perhaps the most important components within this xlog header. Again, resource manager has its importance, that okay, if your WAL record is being generated by the heap or whatever, right? And but again, these especially the excel underscore previous pointer provides you the ability to actually roll back when you're actually when you actually use the rollback command. It is like with this particular excel previous pointer, you actually like the entire logic depends on this particular pointer to accomplish that particular functionality. Now again, in a wall record, you basically depending on the level that you have configured in your PostgreSQL configuration, wall can store a lot of varying types of data. But initially, like the default is that it will contain information about the page, about the structure of the page, about the structure of the pages, like how a particular page is structured, how the data is stored within it, and what are the pointers related to all of that, right? And when we talk about a Postgres page, we like Postgres uses the slotted pages data structure. So there you have, like in slotted pages, you store all of your pointers to the data from left to right, whereas you store the actual data points from right to left in that particular memory block. But with that main data being stored in this page, you also have 3 separate files that are also maintained. So first is the free space map. The free space map basically like tracks, like the name gives it away, that it tracks the availability, like the available slots within that particular page. So it makes inserting a new record into that page very easy. Visibility map is more about is basically, it's a flag which basically tells you that okay, this particular tuple inside this page is ready to be used by a transaction. It can either be like visible or it could be frozen. So if it's in frozen state, the transaction cannot pick it up. And init is something which is maintained for unlocked tables. So in case of unlocked tables, you actually don't, like whenever you want to replay or whenever you want to restore your database, in case of unlocked tables, you don't want the data that was stored in them. You just need the structure that was given for these tables. So init basically, the init flag basically maintains that particular data. And the question is, why did we just discuss that? So this is because the wall record also contains that information. So first we got the xlog record header. Below that we have the xlog record block header. So the block header basically, again, like the name again gives it away, that it basically contains information about the block where these particular pages are stored. And it is here where we actually we actually specify which particular fork flags this block is associated with, so that the wall can actually structure the data, the data can be structured and like replayed accordingly when we actually utilize the wall again. Within the, like as I discussed earlier, so there are 4 types of flags, fork flags. So we have the main fork flag, which again stores the actual data that was contained within that page. Then you have the FSM fork flag, the free space map fork flag, which basically again tracks the availability, tracks which spaces are available in the page to insert the data. And yeah, these like VSM and init remain the same as we discussed earlier, right? So this particular header is useful when you actually replay the wall, and the wall actually needs to understand what to actually do with this particular data that I have with me in this particular section. The xlog, the block header also contains 2 more subparts. So first is the xlog record block image header. So this actually contains data about the holes within that page. So let's say you ran a delete query and it removed certain tuples from your pages, right? So when those pages are removed, Postgres doesn't automatically move all the pages to cover that memory. Those until a vacuum is run. So those empty spaces within a page are termed as holes. So the image header basically consists information about that, and the block compress header is sort of a more detailed version of the same image header. And after that, like after all these headers, we actually get to the actual page data, which is stored in the xlog record data header. Now this comes in two categories, short and long, depending on the structure of the page. But yes, this is the actual place where the data for that particular page is stored. So if we like just zoom back, like zoom out a little, we'll see that okay, we have the xlog record header, which contains very basic data about how the record is going to look like. The block header has some data about how the pages are going to look like, and the data header basically contains all involves all the actual things that are related to that particular page. So like this is a very simplified summary of how the wall record looks like, right? And if you want, you can actually use the PG wall inspect module within Postgres to actually like see all of these parameters and make decisions based on that. Now we understand how a wall record is actually generated, but now once this wall record is generated, you actually want it in your wall files, right, to actually utilize in the various use cases. So ideally, from a systems perspective, the wall is sort of an infinite stream of records, right? Although it is bifurcated into files, we'll come to that later, but internally, the wall is considered as an infinite stream of records for a particular timeline. And within this infinite stream, we have a log sequence number which is associated with that particular wall record. And this log sequence number is just a unsigned 64-bit integer, which tells you that, okay, this is the entire wall for this particular timeline, and this is the location of this particular wall record. Now, as I've mentioned, this is a 64-bit integer, so the first 32-bit bits are actually what we call as the high, like it is labeled as the high 32 bits, but it like represents the logical ID of that particular wall stream. Then you have the two high bits, two 8 high bits within the lower segment, like the lower 32 bits. So these represent the segment ID of that particular wall record. So this comes in handy when you actually bifurcate wall into smaller files. The these 8 bits, and the final value is actually the offset within that file. So if you just go ahead a little, so if you see, like if you just go into your PG wall directory, you'll notice that you have these files that have a very weird sort of naming, but you'll see that okay, they are in a very serial pattern, right? If as you can see that this one ends with 1 and the other file is ending with 2, so these are serial, these are in order, right? So these like the last 2 bits are actually the high 8 bits that we discussed earlier. So this is where these bits actually come in, right? And if we go like if you like actually want to see which particular LSN your wall is on right now, like which is the latest record in your wall, you can actually use the PG current wall LSN command, LSN function. So this basically gives you the exact the LSN value in hexadecimal format. If you want to see which particular wall record was flushed to disk most recently, so for that you have the PG current wall flush log sequence number function. So this also gives you that information. In this case, the most recent wall record was the same as the flushed one, but in practical use cases this would differ. Now coming back to how the wall records are actually stored. So I mentioned that wall is considered to be an infinite stream, like for that particular timeline, right? So if I'm operating my database, so that particular session, you can just assume that session is sort of the timeline is sort of like a session for a database. Like okay, I need to maintain all of the things that happen within this particular session or timeline, right? So whenever a Postgres store like flushes the wall records to the disk, it actually names the file according to that. So you these are basically 16 MB files, but you can actually modify the size of these wall files depending on your use cases. So I think the upper limit was 1 GB for this, but yes, this is again this can be modified, and this basically contains that the file name basically contains some critical information that again which timeline this particular wall record belongs to. And like in this case, both of these wall records are from the same timeline, right? And after that, you have the logical idea of that particular particular wall file, and then you have the actual like 8 bits that separate out these two that actually separate out these two files into 16 MB chunks. Again, if you want to get the actual wall file within like that is present on your disk, you can use the pg wall file name function, and you just need to give the LSN value there. So in this case, like I have hard coded the value, but again I could have just called the function again within this, right, to actually get the file of the latest wall record. Now again, a question arises that, okay, so we are generating all of these records, so do I need to maintain a wall file, like a very large log file, to actually recover from crashes? That, okay, like that if I had some data in my database originally and it just crashed suddenly in the middle of the day, so do I need all the wall files to actually recover that particular instance? So like in theory it sounds doable, but again when it comes to practical use cases where you have tons of data within your database, it is not feasible to just build that instance from ground up at the byte level using wall files. So to actually tackle this, we have checkpoints within Postgres. So checkpoints are basically when your Postgres instance is running, it basically periodically stores a snapshot of your entire DB on disk. So whenever a crash occurs, you can actually just resume from that particular checkpoint, replay the wall on that, and you can actually like end up like recovering your entire database. Again, now these 2 points make sense, that okay, we have checkpoints, we also have the wall present in like we also have the wall records present on my disk. But how do you actually know on which particular checkpoint do you actually need to apply, like which wall record you need to apply? So for that, we have a PG control file within Postgres. So this is a very small 8 KB binary file, and this basically stores the ID of the last checkpoint, that okay, this was the last checkpoint that took place within my Postgres cluster, and it also contains the last log sequence number for the wall record that was flushed to the disk, as well as it also contains the log sequence number of the current wall record that is like the current wall record that at which the wall is at as of now. And like last but not the least, it also contains a very critical piece of information, which is the database state. So whenever you start your database, right, we'll just first cover the control file because that comes in later. But again, the control file data sort of looks like this. You have again an xlog record pointer to the checkpoint, and then you have some basic let's say some basic pointers to your wall entries and other important things. Yeah, so whenever your database actually starts up, whenever the postmaster like the startup function is triggered in the postmaster.c file, there is a function called startup xlog which is triggered. This startup xlog basically just uses the database state that we had in the PG control file to actually determine what is the process of booting up the database, like bringing it up to the operational state. So if that particular database was in a recovery, like there are 4 states, I am not able to recall all the enums that were present there, but there is a recovery state in like if your database is in that recovery state, it actually utilizes the data within the PG control file to actually bring your database back to an operation, back to operation. Like if there was if the database state previously was normal, like it was normally shut down, it just cleans up the temporary wall files that were generated, and after that your database is good to go. Now for this particular presentation, I actually ran a a very small transaction on Postgres and actually sort of generated a flame graph for it. Like this is just for visualizing where exactly in the flow the wall functions come in. So we have the like this is the point where the postmaster actually forked the process to handle all of the transactions, and in the Postgres main we have the exec simple query. So whenever I like started with this begin statement, the exec simple query function was called, and after that we can see that okay we have after that we actually have some functions related to the transaction. I hope this is visible. I'll just zoom in a little. Okay, so we have some functions related to the transaction. So so once we actually wrapped up all of these statements and we actually made a commit, we actually triggered the commit transaction function. Now this commit transaction then led to the like led to Postgres actually flushing the current wall records that were there in memory, like just flushing them on disk to ensure that if that after this change we could actually recover from any crashes. And after that like this, if we take a look at this issue xlog fsync, so these xlog flush and xlog write functions actually triggered the issue xlog fsync function system calls. Like this is just a system call to the fsync system call to actually store the last wall records directly on disk. And after this all of our transactions were actually like all the manipulation of the pages that were brought into the shared buffers was carried out. So you can see that there is a bulk insert flush function that was called, which basically like these are bulk this is a bulk insert, right? So this particular function actually led to that. And like coming back to the presentation, so with again like now we'll come to some features that Vault provides. So crash recovery we just discussed. Like the entire reason for the existence of Vault is to make Postgres durable and to allow for crash recovery. But another pretty useful feature is point-in-time recovery. So let's say if you want to move back to a particular state of your Postgres instance, so that is achievable through point-in-time recovery. So in this, basically, like the primary requirement for this particular step is to have a base backup of your entire cluster. On top of that, you also need to have some configurations related to the archive modes in your PostgreSQL.conf. And whenever you want to like recover, whenever you want to start doing a point-in-time recovery, you like wipe out your PG data directory, and then you then you actually add a file called recovery.signal. Within this recovery.signal file, you basically provide the actual data points from where your instance needs to start up again. So you have the target time, the target LSN, and the target action promote. So promote basically means that you are making this particular instance the main instance if you have a hot standby sort of configuration. And after this file has been created, it is then that you start up your Postgres cluster. The postmaster process automatically picks up the recovery.signal file, and it basically instructs startup xlog to actually start reading from that particular LSN. So this was directly in the workflow that we discussed earlier related to how startup xlog is called within the postmaster process. And after this, Postgres basically resets the timeline for this for this particular cluster. So after this, whatever Vault records are written, they are written to a completely new timeline. Right. So again, another very interesting feature that the write-ahead log powers is streaming replication. So streaming replication, as everyone is aware, that we are just creating a byte-to-byte copy of your existing database. So to power this, we have the Vault sender process within Postgres, which basically sends the Vault files sends the Vault files as soon as they are generated to the streaming replica, and it actually like copies each and every content of the pages byte to byte. And finally, we have logical replication, which is more like sort of executing the same. Like this is how I like to understand it. Like sort of like executing the same SQL statements again on the replica. But in this case, it has been sort of handled by Postgres for you. A very important requirement for this is to actually set the wall level to logical, so that when the wall sender process actually starts sending all of these wall records to your replicas, it basically uses a logical decoding plugin to sort of truncate the entire wall record to like get this SQL statement execution like functionality, right? So yeah, since we are very short on time, so I had to rush through this entire presentation. But yeah, thank you for staying so patient. And if you have any questions, I would like to answer them. What? Crash recovery. Okay. So we'll need to go back a little. So in the crash recovery process, like I mentioned, the PG control file, right? So within the PG control file, we have this database state variable. So this basically, so whenever your database crashes, so this data, like this particular variable is actually set in the PG control file. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, so there is actually a failsafe for that. So if your last checkpoint was like corrupted, or like there was some problem with the last checkpoint, so within this entire crash recovery process, like before this entire flow is triggered, there is a there is a function called to basically check if that particular last checkpoint is in a good state to actually replay the wall on. So if your checkpoint is bad, Postgres won't be able to recover on top of that. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, that is what actually happens, because see, again, if you just have an empty database and you apply all the redo or reapply or replay all the wall records on that, that actually takes a lot of time, because you're just making a copies again and again, right? So if you already have a copy that is good to go, then you can easily like it takes less, like it is much faster and efficient in that particular process. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so thank you guys. Thank you so much.